Okay, what we're going to do today is we're going to move beyond the Norman period of York and move into the medieval period. So we're going to be looking in the 13th and 14th centuries today at three kings, easy to remember because they're all called Edward. Edward the First, Edward the Second and Edward the Third. So after the Norman period, the medieval period sees York possibly at its height. It was made the capital on a couple of occasions. Many of the main buildings of York, St Mary's Abbey, St Leonard's Hospital, the castle of course, and in particular York Minster, one of the great cathedrals in the world, all come into existence. And York is really a booming city. It's a rich city. So as I say, we're going to look at three kings and the impact that those three kings had on the city of York. The first of these is Edward I, who was king between 1272 and 1307. So Edward I became king when his father, Henry III, died in 1272, and he is widely remembered for granting Parliament more power, for giving them more power. But he had a number of problems in the rest of what would become, over time, Great Britain. So he successfully conquered Wales, first of all. What he then decided to do was focus on Scotland, and this proved a little bit more problematic than conquering Wales. So in 1296, Edward I launches his first attack on the Scots. Now how this impacts on York is when Edward I is invading Scotland, York is used as his base for these invasions. So it finds itself a base for all of these military operations. So such is its importance that in 1298, Edward I moves two government departments to York. He moves Chancery, which is important law offices, and he uses the Exchequer, which deals with finance, to York. They eventually return to London in 1304, but in effect, between 1298 and 1304, York is in effect the capital of England. So it also served as a base for the army. So there were a number of soldiers who would come through York, and this had a positive impact on York's economy. So it was a booming time for shopkeepers. It was a booming time for merchants, of those involved in trade as well. So York did quite well on the reign of Edward I, but he made two decisions which would have a huge impact on the city of York. Firstly, in 1290, he expels all Jews from England. So after the massacre at Clifford's Tower, which we looked at last week, there still were a number of wealthy Jews in York, but they were expelled from the city in 1290. They were expelled from the country in 1290. And secondly, he created a place called Kingston upon Hull, which I'm sure you've heard of, by royal charter. And this was to go on to become a major shipping centre, and in the long term it leads to a decline for York as a centre of trade.